the water's fine, homie, jump into the deep end. Sow it, you will reap it. We talking how to start it, how to grow it, how to keep it. Take a deep breath. You are now rocking with Founder Secrets.
John Dewey Electronics. Welcome to Founder Secrets.
Thank you.
So John and I have known each other a long time. You're our first, I think, government contractor, but if not the first government contractor, you're certainly the first, defense contractor that we've had on the pod. So I think that it's going to be a very interesting discussion. But before we dive into that, we have our icebreaker as we start each of these podcasts with. And this one, I admit it right before, it's a little selfish. So the question is, have you had pets? And if so, tell us a bit about your favorite pet, or maybe a favorite pet now or in the past. And if you haven't had a pet, then, maybe why not? Or no, but I could go.
Why I hate pets or something? No, I like pulling the wings from them. Just kidding.
Yeah. So I could go, and then Flavia and John. So we just got a golden doodle. She's the best. We just got her hair cut yesterday for the first time. They get very fluffy, like big and poofy, kind of like my hair, actually. It grows out. And we got her cut, and now she looks like a doodle, or like a poodle. She looks like a poodle, which I like less. So the next haircut, I don't think we'll do that. But we did have pets growing up, but it's so different to own a pet, where I got to take care of it, and it's really reliant on us. But I highly recommend anybody who's thinking about pets. What about you, Flavia?
Welcome to This Week in Pets, a podcast that covers all your pet needs. Sponsored by Dewey. I had a pet dog named Rocky that I really loved a lot, and he was a dachshund, which is like very, I guess, emotionally attached, more intelligent dog. So the only thing I regret is one time I really, I was the only boy, so I wanted to kind of get in snowball fights with people. And one time I tried to get in a snowball fight with this dachshund named Rocky, and he wasn't really a match. And I felt like I was abusing him a little bit. And I still, to this day, regret that. He was feeling so sad, and it was getting snowballs thrown at him, and it was cold. So it's my biggest regret about having a pet.
Oh, what about you, John?
Okay. So my favorite pet was this giant cat we had when I was a kid, a Maine Coon. They look like raccoons, basically. They're giant. Wow. But the most fun to talk about was our pet skunk, Chanel, who used to get in fights with the Maine Coon all the time. So you imagine this little skunk fighting with this giant cat that looked like a raccoon, and then the skunk couldn't stink up anything, but it would sit around and hop up. Once the cat hit it, it would hop around on its back legs, and that was so. That was a long time ago, though.
Isn't that what raccoons do? Why couldn't he stink up?
Well, the skunk, you get them fixed, so that they make a really lousy pet if you don't get them fixed.
They smell awful.
Yeah, basically.
That's why you named him Chanel.
Yes, that was my idea. My mom's idea was Chanel number 5, I believe, was the whole name, which is, I believe, a very particular of the Chanel perfumes.
Very expensive bag, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's dive in. So John, you, I think there are two interesting things to start with. One is that you took over a family business, and the other is that it was a public company at the time. It was a publicly traded company.
It has your name on the door.
Has your name on the door. So it's 50 years old, 60 years old, starting next year in January.
We own a division that's coming up on 100 years. So there's some and that thing still makes stuff that hangs off the bottom of Navy ships. So there's some old company in here that was not started by family. That was bought along the way. But so I was not involved in this business at all. I was a management consultant. I spent half my time consulting, half my time I'd gone to art school and was an artist in New York. So I was pretty far away from the family business when the family member died unexpectedly. And basically we're looking at all this value caught up in a business that my father should have sold probably 20 years sooner. He was in his late 70s and had kind of lost the spark to a degree. Sort of a classic late stage founder thing. It's good to sell your business when things are great, and not so good to sell it later. And so I stepped in and committed to do 2 years. And so it was public. It had gone public in the 60s, but was a very small. We were a micro cap, nano cap, femto cap, maybe is even a better word for it, on the stock exchange. And I took it over thinking it'd take me 2 years to turn around and sell it. I was a hotshot management consultant. I mean, how hard could it be? And 24 years later, here I am. But I fell in love with it along the way. And so I've stuck around. But we took the company dark in 2008, which was
What do you mean you took it dark?
Oh, so dark. So dim actually is what we call it, which means I still have most of my investors and I still report my financial, but I'm not registered with the SEC. So I've got like 200 and some odd investors, and we now sell on the pink sheets actually. So like, which is, and actually for us going dim was the best thing I ever did, because we went from being an absolutely invisible company with a clean balance sheet and clean financials on the stock exchange that nobody could care about to there's a whole ecosystem in the pink sheets that likes a reporting company that's transparent and current and stuff like that. So normally
people could buy your stock today, like
it's hard to now because the way the SEC's changed some rules, so really only accredited investors can buy my shares. Canadians can do it, and accredited U.S. investors can do it. So it's a I can get into that, but the pink sheets are going. There are a lot of dodgy pink sheets, and the SEC is trying to clean that up.
Right. It's like a Wolf of Wall Street stuff. Weren't they trying to sell like pink sheets to companies?
Not me, but yes,
of course.
Of course. What is the? You touched on it a little bit, but what does the business do? Like you sell primarily to the military and governments, but what are the things that you sell and make?
So we have two lines of business. I call them power products and non-power products. That's really descriptive for the second one. But the power products are military generators that are all used in what's called the austere environment. And that means it's space where I have to be able to pick it up myself. So it's as big a generator as I can make it, but it's still one or two people can lift it. It's all aimed at battlefield applications. So these are very rugged environments. They have to work in the Arctic. They have to work in the desert. They have to work all the time. So we're not talking about like James Bond and Dr. No level of technology here. It's all, just think 1970s Army movie, like just really reliable stuff that can take a beating. And that's most of the power stuff. We have some newer, highly innovative generators that are tiny, different customers in the military. And then we've got a bunch of these old school parts that go on submarines and airplanes and things, which I don't really do any business development there. Those are contracts that we won years ago, and it's just repeat business. So we've got a full factory. We do all our own manufacturing, where I think we'll be at somewhere around $10 million this year, maybe only 7. It depends on a big contract that may be there, may not. And most of our revenue and profit comes from manufacturing. So I do a lot of engineering, but it's all to get manufacturing
here in the States. You manufacture here in the US.
Yeah, in New Jersey.
So the power generators and like generate power, right? For like just to make sure.
Yeah, it's the loud diesel engine that we make we have two product lines. One are these loud diesel engines that are so loud that if you're within like 3 feet of it without ear protection, you probably cannot do simple math in your head. They are that loud. Okay. But they are super, super reliable, so that like if you're out in the middle of the desert, I just know it's going to work. And, they might be 2 feet by 4 feet, weigh 150 pounds, and they run on heavy fuels, diesel, jet fuel, stuff like that, not gasoline. And then they power everything from just simple radios to water filtration. We do most of our generators are for mission critical apps, and what that really means is they're like powering. The classic one is a counter mortar system. So a forward operating base has this gizmo that protects the soldiers from incoming mortar rounds. Okay. And it's this thing that sits on a tripod. You really cannot afford for it to shut off, because when it shuts off, people start sending it. What it does is it's designed to detect an incoming mortar round, detonate it, and then send artillery fire back. Right. So so you want that generator to work all the time. Right. So that's a case where you don't want a fancy generator. You want a very reliable generator. And that's would be a classic application for us.
So the defense industry seems like has gotten really hot recently. I don't know if you're aware. Right?
Like say some more when you say that. Where that impression's coming from?
I think
like
Andrew Palmer Luckey, the guy who built that VR set nobody uses at Facebook, he also built a very successful defense company. And it seems not just that, but there's other venture capital money going in. I personally know a guy who's doing a lot of M&A in the space, thinking it's gonna. I think they mentioned, you had some conference, you mentioned that the spending on defense by the U.S. is expected to grow, I forget, like 3x or something in the next 20 years, something. So I guess it seems like it's moving up and to the right, which I guess politically and, from a peaceful soul standpoint, it might be arguably, not a good thing. But from a business standpoint, I'm just wondering, like, do you see this? Is this like, do you see, how do you feel about this industry all of a sudden being like a hot industry?
People are talking about it.
People are talking. So it's interesting, right? So I've been in this space now for coming up on 25 years, and I'm not a defense hawk by any stretch. I kind of rationalize it as by having really great systems, we have a very strong defense, and then we won't get in a fight is how I tend to think about it. But so I do know that there's a lot of change happening, right? Like, so you have when you think about defense, you can think about big army, which is the biggest footprint, and they coming out of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have had to rethink how they're going to fight a war. And so there's been a lot of rethinking because they spent 20 years basically in high mountains and high desert, which is not how, when through the Cold War, it was all about maneuver warfare, which means giant columns fighting in Europe or in Asia, crossing rivers and mountains and tank, and that all changed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's still changing now. The Navy and the Air Force is all retooling now to be able to provide defense basically in Asia. And there's a lot of money going there. And so do I see that as innovation? Interestingly, like I see that as the Navy now needs to keep more aircraft carriers going. So I sell things that sit on the bottom of aircraft carriers. And so we're seeing more of that. So I guess the Army has been confused, so I'm not seeing a ton of innovation there. Special Forces world is just on fire, and there's a lot of private equity money in the Special Forces world. I think they've just figured out how to do venture capital and private equity in the Special Forces world. So anybody with a good idea has got potential funders to talk to. It's interesting. That's the
also hear about the defense industry that there's some big companies that control it all, and it's a cost plus system, and you just keep adding on to the fat every year, and these companies just keep going bigger.
I keep looking for $200,000 toilet seats I can sell.
John wants those deals.
I have not found one. Right? I can I can tell a whole story about that toilet seat, but I don't think anybody wants to hear it. I'm not in the cost plus world, but I do live in a world where flawless execution and both in delivering products exactly as they want and making sure they work exactly like that, the counter mortar system. Nobody wants me to be trying to save 10% and then have it fail twice as often, right? So that the cost structures are just radically different in my world. There's no doubt about it. I will say that, everybody thinks it's corrupt and slow, but there is no instance in human history that so much money has been spent with so little corruption and so little wastage. I mean, it does seem like it's a lot of wasted stuff, but when you think about the scale that people have tried, the endeavor, so I don't know. I mean, I'm not a big hawk, but I'm.
You think it's mischaracterized? You think that the news and others?
I think all those examples are true; they're real. But I think that we fail to notice the other 98% of it that's being right. Like, no, that toilet seat that was too expensive, or the wrench that was too expensive exists, and somebody might have a really good reason why. Right. Like, they didn't want the toilet seat flying through the airplane at 180 miles an hour, decapitating everybody. So they spent way too much money trying to protect it. Right. But it's still a crazy, this stuff still happens. Yeah.
How do you, as a $10 million business, compete with that? So I would think that only the big companies win all the contracts, and a smaller company like yourself doesn't stand a chance. And it seems like you have been able to.
Yeah. So we are niche. Like we make really unique small generators that nobody else can do. And it's complicated system engineering, which means that, I make generators for companies that make generators for the military. But when it's a complex generator, they come to us because, lots of gray hair. If they want to do it, they need, a 60 or 70-year-old engineer to make it work. And that person's busy doing, for General Dynamics, they're busy doing something else. So they need us to solve their complicated power problems. So it's not, I'm not competing with them. I mean, occasionally I'm competing against them, but General Dynamics, if they're going to make a generator, they want to make a simpler one they can make 10,000 of, whereas I'm making one that they'll make 1,000 of, and it's very specific.
So I think a lot of the audience has not, maybe none of the audience has sold to the military or had experience in even government contracts, like large government contracts, let's say the federal government. What do you think would be surprising to someone who's used to selling and contracting with, Fortune 500s or mid-sized companies versus dealing with the government or the military?
The sales cycle, like if I'm at a trade show and I'm talking to a senior vice president at a large prime contractor, I might actually land a piece of business then, because I can convince them that we are super competent, that they can trust us over the long term. And the first piece of profitable revenue probably won't happen for 5 years. Yeah. Now, it makes for an amazing sales pipeline, because if I have 10 of these opportunities in my pipeline and I lose half of them, that's still 2 or 3 giant contracts that will turn into 10-year pieces of business, if not 20-year pieces of business. So you have this pipeline that is incredible. Those eyes are still bugged out. Listen, I can't tell which it is, but the sales cycles. I mean, I bought a company and we landed business that had been in their pipeline for 10 years. We brought in business that had taken that long.
What takes that long? Is it the negotiating? Is it just why does it take so long?
So I get the generator on that program when they're still speccing out they're trying to figure out that counter mortar system. It took 5 years to get from the cocktail napkin to testing units in the field, right? And then it took them another 3 years to start making thousands of them a year. Okay. And the generator didn't take that long, but early on, we convinced them that our generator was by far no, you want to use ours. I know it's really loud, but it's really reliable. And this application needs this mix, right? You don't want a small, so you win the business early on when you're convincing them of your competence, basically. Yeah, I trust them to stick with this over the period to make it work. But then it's big army, right? It takes them, I'm almost afraid of overnight business because something's gone terribly wrong somewhere in that. If they need generators tomorrow, it's probably a sign something's not been well managed, which means is it going to turn into repeat bit? So that's definitely the shocking part of it. Now, when I went through a period when I was trying to sell a business in this space, and I could not convince a single private equity firm that my pipeline was pure gold. And I kind of wanted to write them all 5 years later and be like, remember what I said about that pipeline and how you guys didn't believe I was could be hitting 10% of it, and it all came through. But I mean, right.
So this would be surprising. So the length of time that it takes, is the rest of the sales process kind of normal in that they ask, you reach out to them, you meet them at this conference, you show them the product. Is it very regimented? You have to follow these specific guidelines and you have to wait 30 days and then you have to do this. Or is the rest kind of normal?
So it depends who I'm selling to. If I'm selling directly to the federal government, often it's running through full and open competition, which means it's a huge bid package. When I first got in this business, you'd send these boxes that were 3 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet filled with copies of the proposal. And now that's usually electronic, but not always. And in there'd be 200 pages of costing data where I'd have to show them every washer, every minute of labor on the factory floor. And they'd be comparing that they'd protect the data, but they were making sure it was all valid. And so that's free and open competition. Usually when you're in that space, it's also going through what we call is LP, lowest price technically acceptable, which means as long as everybody passes a minimum threshold, it's just based on price. And that's not a very profitable business. And if I'm trying to own my niche and I'm trying to be the very best in the field and I'm trying to help my customer do things they could never do before, that's not the right space for me. But that's how a lot of government contracting happens. And I have a lot of contracts that still run through that filter. But most of the business development, it's a complicated engineering sale where you got to convince them you can do this heavy lifting. Right? It's because that program, what is it? The best way to describe it is imagine you're having a wedding on a private island and somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to change your plumbing and electrical system the night before the wedding. And you're like, yeah, no. And you're like, well, if you don't, your power is going to go off in the the toilets are going to quit working. And they're like, that's where we are in that thing. And so you really got to convince people you know what you're doing, and you got to get them, if they're going to, in that island metaphor, if they're going to be able to pull it off with twice as many people or twice as much lights or whatever, they need us. They need to trust us, and we need to make sure they don't do dumb things. And that's a complicated relationship.
And you were able to do that, because initially when you joined the business, you didn't have that expertise, right? You were a management consultant.
We were a pure bid to print business, which was purely lowest price technically acceptable. So
the
government would have blueprints for everything they needed, and everybody's just bidding on who can make it cheaper. And we had one generator. Why did you change that? Because that world was going away, and my dad was a nuclear physicist who could look at those things and make them better than somebody else. Whereas I knew I could be a better business person, which meant understanding what it meant to be in power and to learn the power. Business consultant, I was like, I understand power strategy. I just went after the business side of it instead of I'm not the world's best engineer. I was a software engineer, right? Like I shouldn't be running a factory by any known rules of the universe. And so I switched over to business basically versus manufacturing.
Was it difficult because there's a factory, there are employees on the factory floor. Some of them, I assume, had been there a very long time. Was it difficult getting their trust, or was it difficult, kind of stepping in, or because it was your name, they kind of just fell all right in line?
Yeah. Me and the head of operations used to fight like cats until finally, like 3 or 4 years into it, my staff pulled us aside and they said, "You're making us freaking miserable. Would you guys knock it off?" And we learned how to get along. And he just retired like a year and a half ago. So it was a challenge, and defense is incredibly hard. It's just a really complicated business. I don't know that I'm no more heroic than anybody else. It's just complicated. And so you need, like, my best employees are ones that have already retired, and I've got them to leave. They work General Dynamics, and they now work for another 15 years for me, because I just need that level of experience from everybody. Like, just the guy that did soldering for me for 20 years used to solder satellites, the boards that went in satellites. And then when he retired, he's like, "I don't want to do that anymore, but I'll help you guys make generator controllers, which need to work just as dependably, but they're easier." And he was a fantastic resource. So being green, not knowing anything, and coming in trying to get a bunch of those people to do what you want takes something.
Takes gumption or convincing them to.
Yeah. And it's a great, what is it? It works now. It even worked then. It just took, I'd managed a bunch of software engineers and other management consultants. I'd never run in a blue collar, hardcore factory environment.
And it's interesting that you said you did management consulting and you were an artist. Not a lot of people I met that cross over into those, I guess. Maybe
it's a feeder for the defense industry. I'm constantly running into people now. It's so funny.
What kind of artist were you, and how does that impact I guess.
So I went to art school, get a master's in fine arts kind of thing, and painting, and was making a go at the New York gallery scene. Vague success, not really, but it was all.
Talk about a tough business. That's
no kidding.
And that was lonely. That's why I was okay leaving it, because I was tired of making work in my own studio for 60 hours a week, and then talking to people for a few hours. And I like being more involved with the outside world. I like, when we ship 100 generators in a short period and seeing them all out on the floor, and then talking to people in the field. It's a way more engaging thing now. I still feel like I'm creating, right? Because you can see all the stuff out on the floor, but it still taps into some of that. It's maybe not as creative, I'm not sitting there on the factory going, "I think it needs to be blue." It's like, but it's really funny. There was a period when the Army was doing all this publicity around all the other creative people they had in the Army. And I remember going to this trade show, and up on there's this giant screen, and there are all these like writers and musicians talking about what it's like to be in the Army. And I'm like, "Oh my God, what's happening?" Because it's just a little out of character, but it's definitely not that world. Although the Navy is filled with musicians, and it has to do with sonar and all the good ears for the sonar people. for the submarine fleet. So you see this you'll notice there's a large musical. Actually, you won't notice it, but if you're looking for it, you'll see it in the submariner fleet.
That's a good fun fact. When you think about, there's talk, not so much about generators and things, but there's talk about kind of the future of power generation, nuclear is coming back, some of these things. Do you think that eventually would impact your business, or how do you think of some of those trends looking forward?
So let's see. So one of the things that's been amazing. So power generation and batteries, there's kind of like the laws of physics that mean that it's not like we're going to wake up tomorrow and somebody's going to have something the size of a grape that can power a car for an entire day of driving. I mean, maybe like that'd be awesome. I'd be the first one to read about it and know about it. But so what you see in the battery space and the generator space and things like that is there's still a lot of like 5% improvements and 3% improvements and 6%. And the battery space is it's on fire. And I think it has to do with a bunch of the infrastructure and technology tax acts that came through early on in the Biden administration. I'm not certain about that. But what I know is you go to a trade show now and there's like 20 different companies and they've all got new catalysts and new membranes for batteries and new chemistries. And there's all this stuff happening that for most of the time in this field, you just hadn't seen that. And there's money there for people to build factories, and they're bringing this industry into the States. So when you go anywhere, there's just this explosion of battery technology. And so where you see that now is like everything you see in the store now has a battery in it, right? And that's only going to accelerate. Your stapler is going to have a battery in it because it's like somehow somebody will have figured out and I don't know if the staples will have batteries in them, but somebody like I wouldn't be surprised if somebody doesn't figure out how to do that. It's just there's so much happening. And in that space, there's a lot of change that can happen if suddenly things are only 5 or 10 or 15% better. But there's a lot of things that we couldn't do before. So I see that. You see it like you go down, like I'm trying to figure out how to charge all those batteries because I make generators. So I go to a trade show and it's just like everything has batteries in it now. And I keep like I solve complicated problems. So I'm always like, so are you having trouble charging it? And they're all like, no, it's easy. And I'm like, well, that doesn't do me any good. There's only an opportunity if like they go, oh God, I can't get it charged fast enough or something like that. But whether it's, you remember when, I don't know, when we were kids, the movies where the SEAL divers had those machines that would pull them underwater. It's like a torpedo you'd hold onto the back of them. That whole world has just exploded in the last couple of years. And there's like 80 gazillion different things to pull divers through the water. And they're all based on the fact that I can now put batteries in those things and have them run for 6 hours. Whereas beforehand, like I might get 30, they put 2 car batteries inside the thing and it would go for, So anyway, batteries everywhere. That I see a lot of.
I was listening to Peter Thiel talk about Palantir early on and how they were growing in the government business, but it was so slow to your point that it took a 5-hour sales cycle that they pivoted to more commercial. And now a lot of people don't know this. Palantir has more commercial business than they do government business, even though they're a government contractor. So would you, I guess, do that the commercial?
Yeah, the private equity people, like I don't know how many, like when we were on a heavy acquisition cycle, basically my sales pitch was to find private equity people that had mistakenly bought into a defense business because they'd get in here and I'm like, yeah, it's only 5 years, but I've got this great sales pipeline. And like private equity guy like can't hear that and think you're not lying and stealing from them. Like it's just too long. Like, the last time somebody said it took them 5 years, they're like, right. Can you imagine? I mean, you guys could hardly believe me when I say that. So there was a whole space in there doing what I called shave offs, which was going in and buying product lines that were the defense product line at a commercial business because like the private equity guys couldn't even put valuation on the defense part of it. Because they'd use those 5 years net present value. And when I've literally got a contract now that we're like, how do we make sure that we can still buy this in 2050? And when you've got a 5-year net present value calculation that puts no value on year 6, like I don't care if it's $1 million in revenue at year 8, that's worth like $12 in present today dollars, right? Because of the way that you discount after, and even if you're nice and you push that to 6 or 8 years, which nobody would ever do, they're always trying to get it down to 3 years. And so I had to, I'm not acquiring businesses right now, but that was in fact, my last acquisition was a private equity firm that basically lost interest and folded it.
But you don't want to go the other direction. You don't want to take everything you know about government and start to sell to the private sector. That's just too different.
So
not interesting.
I've taken a swing at it. So those generators are really interesting in cell towers because I can put a bigger generator in a cell tower, and that cell tower could stay online for a week or two instead of, say, 72 hours, except that it would cost the cell phone operator, 2, 4, 10 times as much. Okay. And most commercial industries are always talking about return on investment or maybe return on cash, which is a even sharper tool than return on investment. And they just are allergic to extra. They'll spend 10 times as much on maintenance and could care less because somebody else is, I don't quite know. But so I've looked at oil and gas as another place where they really care about reliability, right? If that refinery stops for a day, they lose $10 million. But it's been iRobot, which is a classic example of a company that made the Roomba, right? Now they weren't really a defense company. Some people sold a portfolio of patent technology over to this other group and they ran with it. What it takes for me to be super successful in defense, it's a cost structure and a mindset. Like even my salespeople or engineers that know, like you can't make one promise that you're not absolutely certain you can deliver on, right? It's like you imagine trying to sell with that ethos in a different environment. You can see how it might help, but it's a really different world.
Your business is set up to sell to military and government. And so because of that, it'd be difficult to change the mindset, the cost structure, the way you do things. It's just different, is what you're saying. It was right.
Yeah. So direct labor, right? Somebody on my factory floor does $1 worth of work and I spend an easy another $10 on top of that, making sure it's done correctly, making sure I record that it's done, making sure the certifications are in place. Like most companies that would do $1 worth of direct labor are hoping to spend another 30 cents on that cost. And because I do that 10x or maybe it's 7x or 12x, depends on the part of my business, is how I land. That's how I land my sales because my customer needs to know that I can deliver that.
So as we kind of round out here, and we'll enter the life hack next. But speaking of the cost structure, I think it's so that some don't realize how much goes into running a public company in terms of the infrastructure, the reporting, the costs of that. As much as you're comfortable sharing, can you just speak to like how maybe onerous isn't the right word, but it seems onerous to me that it is to run a public company versus just a private company. It's a normal owned by 6 shareholders, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So it is onerous. We were very good at it. And so I think the last year I was public, it was costing, I was writing checks to lawyers and auditors for maybe $300,000 or $400,000 a year just to cover the creation of my financial statements and the providing of those to the SEC. Okay. Plus I had a very expensive chief financial officer who was really a public accountant, right? He only thought in terms of public accounting. And whereas I was just talking to another company now that's at about $30 million and they're spending $5 million a year to stay public. And that's pretty normal. I mean, that's not normal for the company that size, but that's like we'd been at it so long that we had really winnowed it down. But even us, when the going got tough, we jettisoned it. And so it is onerous. The other thing that's different is like, so I'm pursuing a piece of pass-through business right now. It's like I'm helping somebody I've got the right government contracting facility, so I can do the business and pass it through. When I was public, there'd be this whole problem of it's going to show up on my earnings statement and it's going to make my ratios look bad. Now I'm going to have to write about it because I have to explain to everybody what's going on. And so the whole time I'd be talking to those people about doing this piece of business, I'd be worrying about like, oh my God, what is the note that's going to have to go in my financial statements to explain this, right? And then like I have to compete against these other companies and now there's going to be a note in there that like there's all this stuff you end up thinking about when you're public that helps tremendously if I'm raising money, right? It's superpower, right? To go out and raise $100 million or $20 million of interest-free equity is like, it's amazing. right? So it's not all like cumbersome without a benefit, but it's a very different mindset versus like when you look at EO, Taylor and I are in EO together. And, I'd say the vast majority of our fellow EO businesses, when they think of their financial statements, they're really thinking about their tax returns, right? And maybe they're going to the bank and borrowing money. It depends. If you have full investors, you change. There's a state change in how I'm doing my financials, right? But my financial statements, it's really just looking at my deductions and making sure that I'm not, I don't get impaled on something about my taxes this year because I can't deduct it for 5 years and I didn't know that. And when you're public, it's like taxes. You almost, what is it? You got to think about your financial statements first and making sure those look right. And if you have brain space left to worry about your taxes, good for you, right? And I don't know if that's so that it's, but on the other hand, like your balance sheet and your P&L, when you're public, there's a reality about them that's just different than when you're not public. It's like it was just always easy for me to borrow money. I just come in and I put that stuff down on the table at the bank and they knew what they were looking at and nobody checked anything else. And it was just an easy conversation, assuming I was making money and I could, pay the service on the debt. Now that I'm dim, I'm back in the world of personal guarantees and convincing them that like I can, it's a whole different world.
I think I know it's very nuanced, but I think that that's so important for people to hear because where else could they hear that kind of firsthand experience of some, the pluses and minuses, and especially someone who's thinking about growing their business and they get it to a certain point and how does it look to go public? So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I think the one thing I will say, and I'm talking to a company now, not for us because of our legacy public, there's a bunch of these they look like stock, but they're crowdfunding, but you're basically selling stock. And I know I've got a competitor company that has just done incredibly well. It's basically crowdfunding. It's not Kickstarter. It's like these are shares, but they're not registered with the SEC. It's in this in-between space. And I don't know what it's like to live in that space to do financial reporting. I know it's not as hard as it was when we were registered with the SEC. That's like the big leagues, but yeah.
Love it.
It's an interesting space.
All right. So we'll wrap with a life hack you'd like to share with the audience. So John, you'll go last so you get a little time to think. Okay. The life hack can be a product that makes your life easier. It could be like a physical product, it could be a pillow, it could be a new bike you just got, it could be a piece of software, in anything along those lines. So I could go first. I have one that I think will appeal to like 7% of the audience, but that 7% will be grateful. So it's this. Everybody has Wi-Fi and they're using Wi-Fi in their house. And traditionally Wi-Fi, if your house is too big or there are big walls or something, you get an extender. So then over the last 5 years, we've morphed into these mesh networks, which sound really, really good. This idea of there's one where the fiber comes into your house and then you put 3 different okay, that's good. My life hack is this. Those suck. The life hack is wired backhauls. So what I mean by that is that if you take a mesh network, if you take the router fiber comes into your house in the basement and then it just goes all around the house, but they're all connected wirelessly. So the mesh is just a lot of these pods or nodes throughout the house that are wirelessly connected. That works okay. It could, if it's set up correctly, it could work pretty well. But to make it work phenomenally well is to run Ethernet between the different nodes. So you do a wired backhaul, like that's what I did here in our apartment. So I did in my brother's house. And you won't find this, like this is the way we used to do it. And it works so much better because they're able to communicate with no latency and it just works. And so that's why it's a very, very narrow. But if you're looking for the best Wi-Fi possible in your house or office, it'd be to run Ethernet cables, Cat6, between the different nodes and then have them all wired together. All right, that is a deep cut.
I have stared at the old phone lines in my house that haven't had a phone on them in like 15 years, and I keep looking at those jacks, going, "I wonder if I could do something like that."
Some of those you can.
But it's one circuit. It's not. Yeah. But anyway,
yes, you can though. You can upgrade those wires. Yeah, I used to be really into this.
My 100-year-old apartment in New York City.
Yeah, right? Probably not. Yeah. Old like copper lines.
Yeah. I love this. We're going back to Ethernet, power generators.
Exactly.
My hack is the Robinhood credit card. I got to say,
that's right. You just got it.
I just got it, and it's like nice experience. It's like the Apple card, but it actually works, and it's 3% cashback, which is like the best thing there is. I'm a sucker for a good cashback credit card. And so this is now like my primary thing. The only thing is like they're trying to be slick. They don't put the number of like the credit card number on the card. Like you get a card that doesn't have a number on it. It's just it's Apple Card did that too. They think it's like cool to not have the credit card number on the credit card. Like it says like I have to go in the app, and then like the app crashed. So I'm like literally can't get my credit card number anywhere. They don't have like a web version. It's all just on the app. So it's like I guess it's a hack
with a caveat.
It does work. You do get 3% cash back, but it seems like they're trying to reinvent the credit card a little too much. I just need the 3%. That's all.
Yeah, my wife and I have a 3%, and I have to say that I know I'm doing like way better than points, but I'm like somehow points make me feel like I'm getting more. Even like 3% is like it's like twice what I was getting, if not 3 times if not 5 times what I was getting in points. But somehow like points, I'm like I can get that new Apple Watch with these points. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't somehow how much I've been fooled by the credit card business. So my hack is, and Taylor gets some credit for this, and it was the check. I love my check marks. Taylor probably doesn't want to hear this. He's probably going to like cry if he has to hear me talking about check marks.
No.
But the couple of years ago, you showed us, I think it was James Clear. It was Atomic Habits or Tiny Habits. But it's basically like, I'm coming up literally next week. I hit 365 days of exercising every other day, meditating 3 out of 4 days, and eating healthy. And actually, the exercise, I'm going to hit 365 days next week, and then I'm at like 350-day streak on the other 2. And it's because of this checkmark app that changed. It's Habit Loop Tracker is the Android app. And it just shows you check marks for every day that you've done it. And so when I think about
Habit Loop Tracker.
Yeah. And it's only in Android. There's the app exists all over. There's a bunch of people have them, but the one I use seems to only be Android. But it just shows you check marks for every day you've done it. So I just told it I want to meditate 3 out of 4 days. And as long as I do 3 days, I get 3 solid check marks. And the 4th day, it gives me a hollow one, which is my freebie. And then and then the next day I do it. And then it's showing me the streak that I pulled this off. I have never successfully exercised. I mean, I know why, because like normally like you'd put it in your calendar and you're like, oh, I got to go to the gym today. Oh, I never go to the gym. Or like, do I have the gym? Like somehow that method for me always would start with negative thoughts. Whereas when you look at the check marks, you're like, oh, look at this. I've got like, 300, even when it was only 20 days, you're like, I'm not missing it. Like, this is awesome. Like, so it seems to replace in my brain the whole approach to make it positive. And so like, I'm buying new clothes now. I'm like healthier than I've been. And it was kind of a lark. This was not me being Mr. Fitness Freak. It was like, I'll try this and see if it works. And a year later, like Taylor will vouch. I'm like wearing different size clothes now. I'm
a different person. It's amazing. That's a great hack. So if somebody's listening to this and they'd like to ask you some questions, reach out to you. How can somebody find more information about you?
I'm on LinkedIn, John Dewey. I'm email the podcast, send it my way. I'd love to answer any questions.
Love it. John, thanks so much for coming on the pod.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'm flattered to be invited.
Thank you for rocking with the homies. Taylor, Trusty, and Flavio. Seize the day, own it. Until next time, hold it down, hold it down. Hey.
Powered by -BA. For more information, visit -BA.nyc.